Blasphemous Act is one of the most overplayed cards in Commander. Now, hold on, before you get your nutsacks in a twist and run down in the comments section and rant about how I'm a hack fraud who doesn't understand EDH and only knows how to play Dragon Tribal, just hear me out. Blasphemous Act is a good card. Really good. Great. In fact, it's really good. When I say overplayed, I don't mean bad, I just mean that there are a lot more decks that are running it than there really should be. Let's take Temple of the False God, for example. It's a fine card. It's great in pure colorless or artifact-heavy decks that want to generate as much mana as possible to push out big threats turn early, but it really shouldn't be in 462,000 decks. Your Rakdos mid-range deck isn't going to benefit from running this clunky land that only produces colorless mana and is a dead draw for turns 1 through 4. Blasphemous Act is a little different from Temple of the False God though, since it isn't a blank piece of cardboard most of the time. No, Blasphemous Act is overplayed because many decks just have better options. Blasphemous Act has its reputation as an auto-include because it's the best board wipe in red. Keyword, in red. Red isn't really known for good board wipes. When you're competing with Chain Reaction, Star of Extinction, and Burn Down the House, Blasphemous Act looks like the best card ever printed. After all, EDH is a format where people play Secure the Waste for 20, so Blasphemous Act is almost always going to cost 1 mana when you want to play it, and 30 damage is usually enough to kill most creatures. So yeah, in mono red decks, Blasphemous Act is a slam dunk. But why in God's name are people running this card in white? White already has the best board wipes in the game. A major weakness of Blasphemous Act is its inflexibility, since it can only ever hit creatures. Blasphemous Act is also kinda unreliable, since it gets cucked by protection in a format where people unironically play Sword of Fire and Ice, and maybe a little more relevantly, Mother of Runes. This comes up a lot more than you might think. Also, while 13 is a lot, that Omnath with a Blackblade Reforged isn't going to be too bothered by your 13 damage board wipe. Meanwhile, White has access to Austere Command and Farewell, which are both extremely flexible and can destroy creatures regardless of toughness. Hell, Farewell even gets around indestructible. Now, just to reiterate, Blasphemous Act is a really good card, but what makes it really good is that its color doesn't have access to real board wipes. It's kind of like Meteor Golem, a good card, but that's really because colorless doesn't have access to good targeted removal. I would say that Blasphemous Act is good in any deck that doesn't have the color white in it. Black has Damnation and Toxic Deluge as solid board wipes, but its other options are pretty lackluster with the possible exception of Dead of Winter or Meat Hook Massacre if you count that as a board wipe. Green is pretty lacking in the board wipe category outside of the Great Aurora, a card in a quarter as many decks of Sword of Body in mind. Anyone who has ever played against the color blue knows it has board wipes, but they typically balance instead of destroy. So in any deck that doesn't include the color white, Blasphemous Act is a great card to play. White has this card called Vanquish the Horde, which kinda makes Blasphemous Act look very sad. Sure, it costs 1 more mana, but it also says the word destroy on it, meaning it gets around that 40/40 Sarah avatar as well as protection. However, despite the clickbait title and thumbnail, as well as the entire video up to this point, I have a twist for you. Because we aren't done talking about Vanquish the Horde, because this video was actually about Vanquish the Horde the entire time! Vanquish the Horde is a really interesting case study. In terms of generically good board wipes, it's hard to beat this one. I mean, it's half as expensive as a Wrath of God, but you really shouldn't play Vanquish the Horde a lot. When I was talking about Blasphemous Act, I brought up flexibility and reliability, but there is a new axis I'd like to bring up here, and that's synergy. Sure, Vanquish the Horde is generically good, but cards like Dusk to Dawn, Organic Extinction, and Hour of Reckoning are going to be much better cards when you factor in synergy. Sure, not every deck is going to have one of these board wipes that has some huge synergy, but Vanquish the Horde also falls in the trap of flexibility. Only hitting creatures is enough for most colors, but in the color with Austere Command, Cleansing Nova, Farewell, even Scour Glass, just hitting creatures is a big hindrance when competing for that coveted board wipe slot in your deck. Even a card like Fumigate has some extra effect staple to it to make it worth your while. This transitions into the main point of this video, and it's that when you're building a deck, you kind of have to go in with the mindset that the generically best card is likely not the best option for your deck. It is important to consider cards that execute the function you are looking for, yeah, but you should avoid just jamming the exact same card into every single deck because it is generically good. Is your token deck suddenly going to become absolute trash because you have Vanquish the Horde in it? No. Is Vanquish the Horde a bad include? Also no. But your deck would be more synergistic with Hour of Reckoning or more flexible with Austere Command, and thus more well-rounded. You could say this doesn't matter and that which random white board wipe you decide to run won't matter 95% of games, and you are partially right. The difference between Vanquish the Horde and Organic Extinction isn't really that impactful, however, it's the mindset that really matters here. Being able to look at 2 cards and say, hey, this card is better in my deck, is the thought process that makes people better deck builders. This extends to beyond just board wipes. This video was actually originally going to be about Manolith, since it's easy to just jam in a Manolith since that card works just fine as a 3 CMC mana rock. However, there are many cards which are what I like to call Manolith with upside. Sure, swapping your Manolith for Mana Geode or Coalition Relic maybe makes your deck like 0.5% better, but the mentality of looking for cards that are better fits rather than generic cards is what makes people better deck builders. So, are Blasphemous Act, Vanquish the Horde, and Manawith bad? Well, Manawith, yes, that card sucks. But the other two? Hell no. Blasphemous Act is a premier board wipe in non-white decks, and Vanquish the Horde is great in mid-range piles with strategies that don't have their own version of Dustaton. But when adding a card to your deck, just take a moment to think if you have better options. Just considering an option that is just slightly more reliable, flexible, or synergistic can make the difference between a solidly made, well-rounded deck or the result from clicking average deck on EDH Trek.